Ric Mixter is back. I think this is year number 3 or 4. It's crazy how quickly the year passes, but it's a pleasure to have you back. Author, diver, documentarian. My first experience with you was watching a news clip where you were described as one of the members firmly on the Mount Rushmore of Great Lakes researchers, and I'm like, that's a title that I've never heard. So Rick, I hope you've been well. I see you're very busy covering your subject matter, and you've been traveling around, and I want to hear about that. I saw you were in Madison this year, which is cool. You're right
It
down the
was so
street.
much fun. Yeah, we literally have been able to track the big dive shows, including that's a Ghost Ships festival that they do there, and I got to talk about the Fitzgerald. And then I'll be in Superior, Wisconsin, where the last dock was made. I've been in E-course where the Fitz was built, so it's nice to kind of follow that course. I've never seen this much interest, and it certainly is because of the 50th anniversary.
Well, and that was actually where I was going to start, because I've noticed over the last year, I think part of it is because our algorithms have gotten really good. So if I'm into this stuff, I'm going to see more of it. And it's the 50th anniversary, but it seems like that with every year that passes, people get more interested in this, or people are talking about it more, or I see more bits of content. Like it seems like this gets bigger every year.
I don't know if it's going to be that way next year. I mean, this is going to be
Good
the
point.
apex, I think, because it's a 50th anniversary. We've got all kinds of interest at all the different locations that ring the bell, that shine the beacons, the lighthouses for the Fitzgerald. I think that this will be the peak, and we'll kind of come down from it. Also, the interest in at least 5 new books that have come out, and that's amazing to see that much interest, and especially from high quality authors. That's a wonderful thing for our Great Lakes shipwrecks.
And you dove the wreck in 94, and you've told that story on the show. So if you're listening to this and you haven't heard that, I'll after our segment's done, I'll make sure you're able to find that. That was in 94. How many people or how many trips have gone down there? Because it's not as many as I bet people would guess, right?
Yeah, and I know that when the Canadian Navy got involved to bring up the bell, the trips increased. I think Emery Christoph had gone down like 6 or 8 times. So by no means have I been down there longer than most people. The longest dive we did was 200 minutes with Fred Shannon, and he did a second dive to put the plaque down at the very end where we marked the crew's names. This is before the bell came up and the memorial bell with all the names came on it. So we were the first to mark that, and he made that second dive. So it's got to be less than 20 people and maybe 3 women, maybe 2 women that have been down there. So it's an elite crew, and I'm honored to be one that got to see it. We did not want to be the one that brought back news of a missing sailor. It was never our intention, but that's kind of put us into the history of the wreck more so than maybe the other divers.
Well, and you were telling me earlier this week about some of the legalities of approaching a wreck like that, and whether it's Canadian water, United States water. I know it's very close to wherever that line of demarcation is, and I don't know how they settle that. Maybe you can explain that. But talk about that part of the dive, because I would imagine a big part of going down to see wrecks is checking legal boxes, checking with local municipalities, and making sure everything's squared away there.
Well, you think about the border that goes between the United States and Canada. It really kind of came up when Ben Franklin was trying to pick out if Isle Royale should be part of Michigan or Minnesota or Canada.
I didn't know that was
And it
Ben Franklin. I didn't know that part of that background.
Oh yeah, he knew the copper resources were on that island, and a lot of people were excited about that. So we fought hard to keep that island, and it's a surprise that it's Michigan because it's so far out. But that's an arbitrary line for the longest time until finally GPS came out, and now you can really figure out, within a few feet if you're there or not. And most of the line had been that the Coast Guard believed it was 750 feet into Canadian water, but our expedition leader said, no, I think it's right on the line. And then I did my book, and I interviewed Tim Askew Jr., who's a sub pilot that was on an opposing team on board the Clelia. And he just volunteered it right away. He goes, that wreck's in American waters. And it makes more sense now when you think about the Michigan legislation that came out. Even though they were all saying, well, it's in Canadian water, why did Michigan pass a law to ban footage from the Edmund Fitzgerald then? I think it was to cover the fact that that's true.
Interesting. Do you think it would be beneficial for more trips to go down there? You said it's probably less than 2 dozen. Like if you could go back down there and spend more time, do you think there's more to uncover and a lot more to be learned?
Yeah, I mean, I was very honest when we first started talking that I barely knew. I knew the song. I knew part of the Coast Guard report. I went down there just to get pictures of the bow and really the stern. Now add in 30 years of interviews, research, and all of the files that have come out from all of that at 6 different libraries. And you're finding that there's all kinds of new questions. I've looked at almost all of the footage now, from the Coast Guard to the '89 expedition, going into the Clelia, and especially, the 16 hours that we filmed with the Delta. And there's a whole bunch of things that are coming up, like, why isn't there any cargo in the forward section? Why didn't I see anything in the first and second hold? And it's starting to change the dynamic. I know now for a fact it never ran aground. I can prove that by so many of the testimonials that we've done, that we've recorded, from the investigators into, even architects that have said that the ship would have sank right at Caribou if it went down, and the guys on the Bayfield that surveyed the area and said the water was actually deeper. There is no mysterious 6-fathom shoal. It did not nosedive. So all of these things are building up this, should we go back? And as the years go past, 25 years ago, I might have said no. Now I'm kind of, well, it's been 50 years. And yeah, I'd kind of like to be there. And that doesn't go well with some of the family members. They're not pleased to hear that, and they're making their voices known. And I understand that. But I don't think that they deserve a voice when all these other shipwrecks, there's 12,000 other shipwrecks where people have lost their lives, 25,000 other people that Gordon Lightfoot never wrote a song about. They don't get a voice on whether or not we dive it. And I don't think that we've abused it. And I don't think we've abused it on the Fitzgerald to the point of where they can say, you can't go down there, quite frankly.
Interesting. And you think it's just solely because of the song?
Oh, it's definitely the song. Nobody knew about the Carl Bradley, 1958, 2 survivors. They had 33 people that drowned, more than on the Edmund Fitzgerald, and they were all forgotten, even though it devastated the community of Rogers City, Michigan. Even a survivor told me that darn song. He goes, all they remember is the Fitzgerald. They don't remember us. Dennis Hale, that's only survivor from the Daniel J. Morrell, went down in 1966, split in half. The stern kept going for 5 more miles, and not a soul survived on that extra time they got. The lifeboat went right down with the ship. And Hale was the same way. That song never mentions us, it doesn't talk about us. And I think that's how I'm feeling now as we look at the 29 times the bell will ring everywhere around the Great Lakes. And I have to say, you know what, maybe it's time we start ringing for the 25,000 other people as well.
Because there are so many shipwrecks, and you've researched and dove a lot of them. One technical question, you were talking a little bit about the wreck and the way the Fitz went down. In everything that I watch, your content or every story that I've ever watched about the Fitzgerald and its sinking, it's always talked about how fast it went down. Is that unique? I mean, you just talked about a ship that split and then half of it went another 5 miles. So tell me about that particular part of this wreck and what makes it unique, or what it tells us about the wreck.
You bet. And the fact that the Morrell was empty when that happened, the Carl Bradley was empty, filled with water, ballast to make sure the propeller could still do its job. But much different when you're loaded with 26,000 tons of iron ore pellets. You're heavier. The ship had been taking damage all year, and the captain pushed, every storm. He hit at least 4, maybe 5 gales in 1975 alone. And we know through the Cook, we know through Coast Guard records that flexing of the ship was different. It was more bigger, more pronounced on the Fitzgerald, and that would cause problems with the keel. And now water's coming in. We knew it leaked through the hatches. It's not a popular theory, but I proved that my dive and the Coast Guard as well, that the hatches weren't all dogged down. Every picture I have of the Fitzgerald shows the hatches weren't dogged down. And then the vents are filling up. The hatch coamings had leaks on them. And that poor ship just got lower and lower in the water until that one big wave that damaged the Anderson sped ahead, hit the Fitzgerald right after they had just said, we're holding our own.
Ric Mixter is here for his yearly visit, and we appreciate his time a ton. It's funny you mentioned the Anderson, because one of my favorite parts about the Fitzgerald is, reading your book or following anything that you do, and you covered this really well. All of the ships and the captains and the men of the other boats that were in the area who went on these search and rescue missions that, they on some level had to understand how insane those missions are. Some of these boats weren't equipped for that. The Wood Rush, which is featured in your new book, the Anderson, the William Clay Ford, talk about some of those captains in that part of the story, because I think it's one of the most interesting parts of the story, and it's not talked about as much.
It's interesting because, here there were several ships that were at anchor. This is the smart thing to do in that storm. And again, let's not blow it out of perspective. This was not even a top 12 storm in the last century. I've heard it described with 100-mile-an-hour winds. I'm like, where are you getting that from? The highest winds I saw sustained were 60 from Standard Rock. And of course, some of the ships said it was a little higher in gusts, but that's not really what you worry about. You need a prolonged wind along, to get that fetch to build the big waves that come up. And it certainly built a big enough wave, but it didn't sink the Anderson. So the big question is, what was wrong with the Fitzgerald when it went down? But when the Coast Guard went to respond, the Naugatuck tried to go out of the Sioux, a little tugboat, had engine problems. It turned back. The Coast Guard sent their airplane and their helicopters out, and then they called the Wood Rush with Captain Jimmy Hobaugh, an amazing skipper. I talked to several of the crew and Jimmy, who actually, I did the last lecture with him before he passed in Bay City. Just an amazing man, a real hero on the Great Lakes to go out and try to find it. And Cooper's interview is amazing because he talks about why the saltwater ships wouldn't turn around. They were much closer. They were an hour closer than he was. The Roush wouldn't turn, bring up its anchor. He said, no, it's too rough. I'm not going to endanger my crew. And that was his responsibility. The Clay Ford didn't go out right away either until the Anderson turned around and they met each other at 2:00 in the morning at the wreck site. And that's where Cooper said, what an exercise in futility. That was his exact quote. What was I going to do? Stop my boat? He said, no, it wasn't possible. So I think in many ways he was glad he didn't find a lifeboat, but he was sad that he didn't find live people either. It would have been amazing to bring people out, but it was so quick. But we don't know. It was a half hour blinded in the snow. The radars blotted out by the snow, the binoculars, the nighttime taking a lot of those lights too that you couldn't see. We don't know how fast it was, but it seems by every account that it was too fast to try to get a mayday out. And that could have been how the ship broke up on the surface. It could have been, just how sudden it was. We don't know. And that's the part that I think we could figure out some of it. And that's what's always kept my interest. But if it was quick, boy, that's amazing because I've heard too many stories of guys slowly dying on life rafts, when the Coast Guard didn't know to search for the guys in the morale. And it just rips your heart out.
Well, and Captain Hobaugh, was that the Wood Rush, which was
a
relatively small boat? And the only reason I remember this because I think it was maybe your special, the Edmund Fitzgerald Investigations, PBS one, and it's on YouTube. It takes me back to elementary school. It's awesome, and there's some interviews in there with him, and that's a captain who obviously knows his equipment and the technical nature of sailing on the lakes. But you could also tell with him that there's a real belief that there's a spirit to the water. There's a person, he believed in that thing too. And that side of a Great Lakes captain is really interesting to me. And if you've done lectures with him, I'm sure you've heard plenty of that as well.
I'm so lucky because not only have I heard from him, and he was, a captain that went to saltwater and came back. Many of the Coast Guard captains would change duties and go to different boats. Captain Muth, who saved the guys on the Sundew, I brought him back from Florida as they were laying that ship up. It's last year of ice breaking. And it was great to talk to him too. They talk about the ocean being a totally different and more predictable sea where you could pitch and yaw and you'd pretty much expect what was coming. But the Great Lakes, it bounces off the shoreline. They said, you don't know where it's coming from. It's so confusing out there that it's a totally different animal. So where some saltwater captains come in and call it ponds, or tiny lakes. No, there's a deep respect for these lakes, even Lake Erie that, is so unpredictable because it's so shallow. Its average depth is 65 feet.
So I know you've dove and explored both Superior and Michigan, and those are the lakes that, flank the northern half, the UP, but then some of Wisconsin as well, and then Lake Michigan all the way down the east coast of Wisconsin and Green Bay and Door County and all of that. I guess I'm interested to just hear you compare your experiences on the lake if we're talking about the personality of the water and, the ecology, the bathymetry, all that stuff, but the feeling and the vibe and the spirit you get from those two lakes and the ways in which they're different.
And I've always said I'm the luckiest boy from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan because I've had great assignments. I spent time with the University of Michigan on Lake Michigan, going out in Laurentian and checking out, the tiniest of creatures as we watch the impact of the zebra and quagga mussels come in. I use that in my special for PBS and Great Lakes in Depth, my series that I did. And it's a different lake. We went out nice and calm. And that night I was hitting my head on the ceiling from my bunk, how fast those waves kick up. And we did the same thing on Superior, going out aboard the research vessel Boyd, which is the one that we have at the museum. I'm on the board of directors at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society. And it was fog and flat calm as we scanned the area. But coming back, we had 9-foot seas. And it just happened like that, never predicted, or we wouldn't have stayed out that long. And it was scary coming back in, because at some point you've got to turn yourself broadside to get into the dock. And that's where it gets messy. If you can keep your nose into it or keep a stern sea, you can almost ride it out. But unfortunately, if you're going to a dock or some place of safety, you're going to eventually have to turn into it. And that's where it gets messy.
Okay, so you said you were in Madison this summer, and you were doing some things around Wisconsin. So I want to hear what you were doing, or where maybe we can find some of that stuff. And then your new book, and we might have even talked about this last year as well, talking about dogs on these shipwreck boats and these rescue boats and the roles that they played. So can you tell us a little bit about maybe your most recent work?
Oh yeah, let me. The first place I went to was Ghost Ships in Manitowoc, and I got to go through
Hmm.
the museum again with Kevin, the director, and see the new model that Richard Sullivan did. Richard did the original Coast Guard drawings that everybody's seen about the Edmund Fitzgerald, and he admitted that most of the stuff was wrong because he just didn't have enough information. Well, Sullivan had contacted our expedition, and we gave him 16 hours of footage, and he came up with this hyper accurate. I mean, right down to the rope that's actually around the steering pole on the bow, and the rope that we saw, the knotted lead leading line that was down on the back of the ship, hanging right over the shoe next to the propeller. So highly detailed. There is some stuff that was missed, and I pointed it out just because I think I'm too smart, but
Of
I at
course.
least wanted to say there was some stuff that I think he made up in some areas too that we didn't know. But what we did know was there's no taconite in the front section. If you look, there's no taconite in hatches 1 or 2. There's no taconite at the break at hatch 8 and 9 in the bow section. That is a clear indication it all spilled out when the ship broke on the surface. Otherwise, it would have spilled as it nosedived in, as so many people believe. But Manitowoc was a great stop. Madison, I came in, and PBS, the Discovery Group, brought me in, and we filmed an incredible series. And I got to meet with underwater archaeologist Tammy, and she's just incredible. We got to have dinner with her, she and her boyfriend, and it was just absolutely amazing. So, and Brendan Baylot, who's another very famous, he found at least 3 shipwrecks last year on Lake Michigan. He joined us too, and it was a lot of fun to come into Wisconsin. I don't get to do that as much as I want, and my dad lives in Wisconsin too, so I've got to get over there soon, and hopefully we can do a tour that would go through Door County and
There we
Milwaukee
go.
as well. But I will be in Superior coming up here just on November 7th or 8th. I think it's the 8th.
Yeah, you're hitting every corner of the state, which I love because I love every corner of the state as well. And your book, Howling Winds, tell us about that and where we can get it, because I haven't got it yet.
Oh, I'll get you a copy, because Howling Winds really kind of started with a shipwreck we found near the Edmund Fitzgerald. Same depth on the American side, we found the Huronton, and it had been a shipwreck that the first mate had run aboard and saved the dog. I saw the name of the first mate and I was blown away. I'd interviewed a crew of the guys that knew Richard Simpel. He had said he'd been on 17 shipwrecks, and I think that was number 2 for him, the Novadoc being number 16 for him. Again, I don't know who would sail with a guy who's been on that many shipwrecks,
I
but
wouldn't.
the truth is the story was amazing. And then I found out through my interviews with Captain Hobaugh that there was a dog aboard the Woodrush that went after the Fitzgerald. So I thought, boy, would this make a great first kids book. But then I realized that some of the outcomes, like the Philadelphia and the Albany, there was no room for the dogs in the lifeboats, and some of those outcomes just isn't fitting for a children's book. So I wrote a full, book about the dogs, and it's called Howling Winds, and I'm really proud of it.
And I'm going to have to get my hands on that. And then Tattletale Sounds as well. I cannot recommend enough. In fact, I normally keep it in my car in the slot behind my driver's seat, because then when I'm on a fishing trip or if we're camping or whatever, that's just I'll pull that out and read a chapter anytime I just need a book when I wouldn't normally have one with me. So that's kind of it's my go-to book.
I'll send you, because Bottled Goodbyes is my other one that I did, and it's all about messages in bottles. And the one ship we're looking for is kind of off the Michigan-Wisconsin border. As you go up north of Door County, approaching St. Martin's Island, Poverty Island, the Plymouth is missing there. And a bottle washed ashore with a note from a policeman who was on board that was trying to protect the ship from being damaged by the people on board. And here they went into the storm of the century in 1913, where 12 ships and all hands died, 260 people lost in one weekend. And the bottle washes ashore, and it says, "Dear wife and kids, we were left here by McKinnon of the tug Martin, and he went away and never said goodbye or anything. I hope I see you in heaven. And P.S. the lumber company owes me $35. So these notes are just so incredibly terrifying and almost humorous in the part where they,
Mhm.
what would you write if you were going to write that last minute? You can't really say, here's where I'm at, because no one could come and get you very quickly like we can with a helicopter today. But those notes have haunted me, and wrote a whole book about those as well.
We'll have to get into that. Rick, I appreciate your time everywhere. Love your work, and anything you do in post will follow along with. So thank you again. I appreciate it.
It's absolutely my thrill. Thanks for keeping maritime history alive.